Every middle-aged woman always has a few so-called besties on the surface. Within these friend groups, whose child is more successful is an eternal topic. One aunt believed her daughter, Sukryu, was truly outstanding. Sukryu had gone to the US to attend a prestigious university and later joined a well-known company. But another aunt wouldn't accept that, insisting her son, Sunghyo, was even more exceptional. Sunghyo was a renowned architectural designer who had participated in many award-winning major projects. In order to outshine her bestie, Sunghyo's mother mentioned that her son had just won an award today. Sukryu's mother, however, played her trump card, marriage. When it came to life milestones, Sukryu was undeniably ahead. She was getting married at the end of the month, and her fiancé was a promising international lawyer. With this, Sukryu's mother successfully harvested a round of envy from her old friends. But what they didn't know was that, despite her smooth career and upcoming wedding, Sukryu had suddenly returned to Korea without telling anyone. As soon as she got off the plane, even her best friend Nayeon, who came to pick her up, was baffled by her unexpected return. What surprised Nayeon even more was bumping into Sukryu's younger brother while out eating fried chicken. Strangely, Sukryu looked like she had seen a ghost and even pushed Nayeon's head down to avoid being spotted by her brother. Nayeon couldn't understand her reaction. Yet, as a true bestie, Nayeon actually believed Sukryu's nonsense and even offered to help tidy up her house to give her parents a surprise. However, halfway there, Nayeon suddenly got a call from work asking her to return for overtime, so Sukryu had to go home alone. On her way back, she passed by her old neighborhood and discovered that the bathhouse she used to go to as a child had been torn down and replaced with a new building. Looking at this new building, memories flooded Sukryu's mind. She remembered how, back then, she and Sunghyo were still little, and their mothers used to drag them to the bathhouse together. So many years had passed, and they had both grown into adults. She started to feel curious about the house built on the old bathhouse site. Sunghyo suddenly appeared. It turned out that this new building had been designed by him. Sukryu, feeling awkward, was about to leave when she noticed that familiar old neighbors were approaching from all directions, including her own mother and her mother's group of friends. Sensing danger, she panicked and dived into a pile of cardboard boxes stacked by Sunghyo at the roadside. Sunghyo had no choice but to help her cover it up. Only after her mother had left did Sukryu dare to climb out of the box. They really were childhood friends. She felt no sense of distance at all. In order to change the subject, she began wandering around Sunghyo's company. She accidentally stepped on a power cable, which caused a wooden bookshelf to topple. Thankfully, Sunghyo reacted swiftly. Though the shelf was saved, the iron sword still struck his shoulder. Sukryu grew worried and insisted on pulling open his shirt to check for injuries. She noticed another scar on his body. Back when they were kids, he got it trying to stop a fight. Sunghyo stepped in to break it up, but got shoved aside and hit an iron fence, leaving the scar. Sunghyo, though, pretended to be annoyed and told her to hurry up and leave. But just as Sukryu was about to get mad and walk off for real, he turned around and advised her to go home quickly. After all, knowing her mother's temper so well, he figured the sooner she went back, the fewer beatings she'd get. The longer she dragged it out, the worse it would be. Meanwhile, their childhood friend Nayeon had just returned to work, only to be sent out on an emergency call. She was a firefighter, a job where the moment someone was in trouble or injured, she had to show up immediately. This time, someone had called 119 because a drunk man was lying on the grass with a bleeding forehead. It wasn't clear whether he was just drunk or had actually drunk himself to death. She tried to draw his blood for testing, but the drunk was aggressive and even threatened her with a beer bottle. Out of caution, she had to back off. Just then, a so-called righteous citizen stepped up, a guy with a red belt. But as soon as he took 2 steps, he clumsily tripped over his own feet and landed face-first on the lawn, accidentally slicing his palm on a piece of broken glass from the bottle. Nayeon was dumbfounded. "Red belt, are you proud of that?" "I'm a black belt." With that, she jumped up and with a clean flying kick sent the beer bottle flying from the drunk man's hand. The force of the kick startled the drunk so much that he immediately gave up resisting and became completely obedient. Meanwhile, after spending an entire afternoon hesitating, Sukryu still had to go home. Standing at her front door, she dug out all the thickest clothes she could find and layered them on like armor. Sunghyo was curious. Just what kind of trouble could have scared her this much? Seeing no one else around, Sukryu, hoping he might help her face her parents' fury, confessed everything that she cancel her engagement. But the moment she raised her voice, it was game over. Coincidentally, her mother and her mother's circle of friends were just returning home, and they heard every single word loud and clear. Family scandals were never meant to be aired in public, but this time it was like shouting them through a megaphone for the whole neighborhood to hear. As expected, her mother exploded with rage and charged at her, ready to beat her to death on the spot. Sukryu instinctively hid behind Sunghyo, but her mother suddenly paused, suspicious. Why would her daughter suddenly cancel her engagement? There was only one explanation. The fiancé must have cheated. Her mother decided she was flying straight to the US to beat the guy up. Seeing this about to spiral even further out of control, Sukryu hurriedly took the blame on herself, claiming she was the one who had been unfaithful. That only made her mother even more furious. Fortunately, her father, feeling sorry for his daughter, stepped in to calm things down. But just as her mother's anger started to ease, Sukryu dropped another bombshell. She had quit her job. This time her mother was beyond furious, vowing to beat her to death for real. With no choice, Sukryu grabbed Sunghyo and ran for her life. The two of them managed to shake off her mother and finally sat down on the roadside, panting for breath. Sunghyo didn't believe her story about canceling the engagement because of cheating or quitting her job to run back to Korea. Even though Sukryu still acted like it didn't matter, he knew something wasn't right. Facing her childhood friend, Sukryu finally spoke the truth for once. She was just too exhausted. Sitting side by side, the two of them were mistaken by a passerby for a couple, and in perfect sync, they both denied it, explaining they were just the children of family friends. Just then, Sukryu's younger brother called Dongjin, asking him to bring his sister home, promising that their mother wouldn't hit her this time. But the moment Sukryu walked through the door, she realized the one thing you should never trust was that kind of promise. Sukryu had always been an exceptionally sensible child. Growing up in a family that struggled financially, she worked several part-time jobs, saving up to buy her mother a pure gold brooch. Her mother had always been proud of her maturity and understanding. But now, this once thoughtful daughter was suddenly acting completely out of character. The truth was, there was no place for her at home anymore. Her old room had long been turned into a storage space, so much so that she had no choice but to sleep on the floor. The next morning, her mother, still stewing over the plan Sukryu had laid out for her return, found her increasingly irritating no matter how she looked at her. Worried for her, her childhood friends even made a special trip the next day to check if she had survived the scolding. Sukryu, however, didn't take her mother's constant glares to heart at all, and within just a few words, she got into a fight with her younger brother. The argument annoyed her mother so much she stormed down to the basement and started hammering away at her drum kit to blow off steam. Even her best friend Nun couldn't understand why she had suddenly thrown away everything. Luckily, work hours arrived, and Nayun had no choice but to leave her questions hanging and head to work. But Sunghyo was still there. Sukryu, thinking about how this guy had left her behind and run away the day before, went straight for a sneak attack, putting him in a chokehold from behind. But her mother couldn't stand watching them mess around and swatted her a few times. Her mother now had far more affection for Sunghyo, whom she saw as a promising young man. She was even so pleased with him that she ordered some traditional rice cakes to celebrate his soon-to-open business. And Sukryu was tasked with delivering them. When she arrived at his company, the co-workers were all curious about their relationship. Upon learning she was Sunghyo's childhood friend, they naturally started asking how they met as kids. In Sukryu's version of the story, Sunghyo had been born in France and couldn't speak Korean when he first returned to Korea, so he was always soft-spoken and shy around strangers. His mother, a busy diplomat, didn't have time to raise him and entrusted him to her old friend, Sukryu's mother. As a result, Sukryu naturally took on the job of looking after him, dragging him around to play. But in Sunghyo's version of the story, things were quite different. The first time they met, he had refused to shake hands with Sukryu, not because he was shy, but because Sukryu's face and hands were filthy. Later, he grew tired of how Sukryu would drag her into all sorts of messy play and deliberately avoided her. But Sukryu wouldn't take no for an answer. She even barged in on her while she was using the bathroom and kept forcing her to eat the vegetables she herself didn't like. She even stole her piggy bank. Sukryu was nothing short of a little tyrant. Meanwhile, back at home, the scandal surrounding Sukryu's sudden return and broken engagement had turned the whole neighborhood into a gossip storm. Wherever her mother went, she couldn't escape being mocked. Frustrated and humiliated, she wanted to confront her daughter for the truth. But Sukryu's father, on the other hand, believed sometimes playing dumb was the best way to handle things. After all, if they really did push their daughter for answers, the reason for the broken engagement might end up being something even harder to accept. Meanwhile, Sukryu was happily hanging out with her best friend Naim, comparing things like nothing was wrong, when suddenly, someone unexpected showed up, Sung-hyo, who had said he wouldn't come. The moment Sukryu saw him, she knew something was wrong, like someone who had just seen a snake. But Sung-hyo stubbornly insisted everything was fine. Of course, there was no way that was true. His law firm was about to open, but they were being stiffed on a major payment for a project. Without that money, they'd be forced to shut down right after opening. Sung-hyo could see through Sukryu too. She was only pretending to be strong. Sure, she could hold on for now, but her mother wasn't going to give up. She went behind her back and actually called Sukryu's ex-fiancé. But the call wasn't answered. Sukryu noticed her mother's strange behavior, grabbed the phone and immediately saw the call log. Furious, she deleted her ex's contact info from her mother's phone on the spot, then stormed out and rode the bus aimlessly through the city. Her mind was filled with all the frustrations from her time in the US, the pressure of working in a major corporation, her struggle with social interactions, the way she buried herself in work, only to be branded arrogant and self-important behind her back by her colleagues. She tried calling her fiancé for comfort, but couldn't reach him at all. In the end, she had no choice but to go straight to his apartment to look for him. But when she got there, she caught him in the middle of an intimate moment with a foreign woman. Snapping out of the painful memory, Sukryu sat in silence on the bus, lost in thought. She rode the bus around all day, and when evening came, she happened to pass by a street vendor selling 6-year-old bonsai trees. She bought one as a gift for Sung-hyo to celebrate the opening of his firm. The next morning, her mother got up early and carefully dressed herself, preparing to attend Sung-hyo's opening ceremony. She even wanted to dig out the pure gold brooch Sukryu had once gifted her. The opening was bustling with old classmates, many of whom had heard about Sukryu's return from America and her broken engagement. They gathered around, itching to watch her mother make a fool of herself, deliberately bringing up sore topics one after another. Fortunately, one of her mother's old friends stepped in at just the right moment to smooth things over. But later, when her mother went to the restroom, she overheard those same classmates mocking her behind her back. They sneered about how back in the day, her grades had been neck and neck with Sung-hyo's mother. But because of her poor family background, she couldn't afford to keep studying and ended up spending her life as a mere companion to people like Sung-hyo's mother. Now, such a family dare dream of raising a golden phoenix? Meanwhile, Sukryu had finally found the gold brooch and rushed over to deliver it to her mother. Just then, they ran into the group of old ladies, who immediately started gossiping and judging her from head to toe. When they got home, her mother vented all her bottled-up frustration about her own failed life onto Sukryu. She dragged out Sukryu's suitcase and tossed it down the stairs, demanding she return to America immediately. But Sukryu had had enough. Her mother only ever cared about how high she could fly, never once caring about how tired she was trying to fly that high. If she hadn't been utterly exhausted, would she really have suddenly given everything up and come home? She felt like that gold brooch. When her mother didn't need her, she'd toss her aside without a second thought, not even caring where she ended up. Only when her mother wanted to polish her own image, to show off, would she dig her out and pin her back on. Seeing her storm out, Sung-hyo quietly followed her all the way to the amusement park. There, Sukryu forced herself to smile and laugh, but in the end she couldn't hold back anymore and finally broke down in tears. She was heartbroken because she realized that she and her mother actually disliked each other. But Sung-hyo comforted her, telling her, without love, there wouldn't be any dislike. Everything stemmed from the fact that both of them had expectations for one another. She felt like her mother had let her down, while her mother felt she hadn't lived the way she wanted her to. That's why resentment had grown between them. Early the next morning, she called Sung-hyo and asked him to help clean and redecorate Sukryu's room. When Sukryu returned home and saw her room beautifully redone, the anger and resentment she'd been holding onto quietly faded away. That night, lying in bed, she suddenly noticed that the ceiling was covered with glow-in-the-dark star stickers, her favorite, and felt both surprised and delighted. While she was happily chatting on the phone, she suddenly sensed something, pulled back the curtain, and found Sung-hyo standing right outside, across the street, looking at her. That scene brought back memories of her younger years. Back then, she'd carefully stuck star stickers on her bedroom ceiling. She'd even fallen off a chair once while doing it, but luckily, Sung-hyo had caught her just in time. Sung-hyo's parents had always been too busy, so busy that even for major competitions they couldn't attend. In the audience, only Sukryu was always there, cheering loudly for him. Her voice had echoed through every one of Sung-hyo's matches, becoming an irreplaceable part of her most beautiful memories. Even now, Sung-hyo sometimes dreamed of her childhood, of her time swimming, only to be woken up by Sukryu's loud voice from next door. After all these years, Sukryu hadn't changed a bit. As a child, it was hard enough just to get a moment with her parents. Now, even when the whole family managed to sit down for a meal, it still felt unfamiliar and awkward. Sung-hyo couldn't help but ask his mother when his job transfer order would finally come through. Early in the morning, the manager brought good news to Sung-hyo. Grape Company was recruiting designers in Korea to help with their office building project and expressed interest in further collaboration. As Sung-hyo worked hard to refine his design plan, Sukryu suddenly lost her temper and told him not to waste his time anymore. It turned out that the other side had turned off the video but left the program running, and Sukryu overheard that they had already chosen another company internally. However, Sung-hyo wasn't planning to give up. Even though he knew the company was only using him as a comparison, he was still determined to complete his design to the best of his ability. Seeing him so determined, Sukryu angrily slammed the door and left. But when the day of the actual interview came, Sukryu still showed up early, saying she was worried they'd be taken advantage of since they didn't speak English well. When they met Grape's team, Sukryu immediately regretted her decision. It turned out the real reason she resigned was because of Chris. They had once been on the same team, but Chris often made excuses to push his work onto Sukryu and badmouthed her behind her back to other colleagues. When Sukryu finally saw Chris's true, nasty face, Sukryu endured this awkward atmosphere, but fortunately, the team really liked Sung-hyo's design and reported it to headquarters. Meanwhile, Chris was still persuading a female colleague to stick to the predetermined plan, telling her not to waste time on such a small company. But headquarters soon called the woman, showing they were seriously considering Sung-hyo's proposal. Sukryu tried her best to avoid Chris, but Chris deliberately sought her out. Sukryu didn't want to argue about what had happened 3 years ago, so she directly told Chris that she knew they had already chosen another company but asked him to show some respect. Chris casually replied that he genuinely regretted Sukryu's departure, because after all, he had lost and easily manipulated underling. As he spoke, he reached out and patted Sukryu's head. Seeing this, Sung-hyo rushed over and warned Chris not to lay a hand on Sukryu. Relying on his position as the client, Chris arrogantly criticized the small company's staff for being unprofessional. If it hadn't been for the manager and Sukryu holding him back, Sung-hyo's fist would have left Chris bruised and swollen. Not wanting Sung-hyo's anger to go to waste, Sukryu humbled herself and quietly begged Chris for leniency. Sukryu walked away coolly, but Sung-hyo chased after her. Sukryu, however, just wanted some space to be alone. When Sukryu finally sat down, Sung-hyo handed her a comforting drink, and only then did Sukryu open up about the burden she'd been carrying. Originally, she thought she left Grape because she was being excluded, but watching Sung-hyo work made her realize the real reason was that she didn't love the job enough. But what concerned Sung-hyo more was the fact that Sukryu had been a victim of workplace bullying. So, Sung-hyo brought Sukryu to a place where they could write down wishes, and he wrote that he hoped Chris would get fat. But when it was her turn, she went all out, cursing Chris from head to toe in her note. As they lightened up and their mood lifted, the manager called with great news. Grape had not only accepted their design proposal but had also fired Chris. It turned out the manager had a habit of recording meetings, And coincidentally, one of his online friends was Grape's vice president. When Sukryu heard this, she was so happy she hugged Sung-hyo, which made Sung-hyo suddenly remember a moment from 10 years ago. Back then he had given his gold medal to Sukryu, but the oblivious Sukryu never picked up on his feelings. Afraid of ruining their childhood friendship by confessing and being rejected, Sung-hyo had decided to wait until they were both grown up. But their feelings were only truly confirmed when Sung-hyo's ex-girlfriend suddenly reappeared. When the company was celebrating, Sukryu used the chance to hug Sung-hyo under the pretext of a congratulatory 11-second hug, and on the way back to the office, used the excuse of losing balance to lean into his arms. At that moment, Sung-hyo finally confirmed that Sukryu was a seasoned master at messing with his heart. And finally, Sung-hyo confessed his feelings to Sukryu, feelings that had been delayed for so long, partly because of the return of Sukryu's ex. Just when Sung-hyo had mustered the courage to confess, the worst timing hit. Sukryu's ex-boyfriend, the one who'd broken her heart, suddenly returned from abroad. Furious, Sung-hyo grabbed Sukryu and stormed off, burning with the urge to give that jerk a proper beating. Even Sukryu's dad wanted to punch the guy, but her mom, oddly enough, warmly invited the ex into their home, served him a full meal, and urged him to eat. Sukryu's dad, both upset and powerless to go against his wife, but everyone had misunderstood Sukryu's mom. She believed that a person should be well fed before setting off on the road. Once the meal was over, she had the two sit down and explain face to face why they had broken up. When the ex tried to paint Sukryu as the one who'd cheated, knowing her daughter wasn't at fault, Sukryu's mom finally relaxed. Then, without a second thought, grabbed a wooden stick and went after the ex, swearing to kill him and turn herself in. Fearing things would really go that far, Sukryu desperately held her back. But the ex, either too clueless or too shameless, practically offered himself up for a beating. Even after all that, the ex still begged for a second chance, saying that after losing Sukryu, his life had fallen apart. No one could tell whether her ex missed Sukryu as a person or just the convenience of having her as his all-purpose helper. Sukryu's mother, eager for her daughter to go study in the US, even tried pushing her to reconcile with her ex. Early the next morning, she forced Sukryu to dress up and arranged for her to coincidentally run into the ex. Thankfully, Sung-hyo showed up just in time to step in and rescue her. He gave her a lift to her cooking class on his bike, teasing her mercilessly the whole way about her overly done makeup. That night, Sukryu confronted her mother, telling her to stop interfering in her personal life. Frustrated, Sukryu went out for a walk to clear her head, and bumped right into Sung-hyo, who was on his way home. Worried about her safety, he urged her to go back, but Sukryu, annoyed, snapped at him for barking at her like a dog. Out on the street, Sukryu suddenly felt someone following her. Panicked, she broke into a run, only to turn around and see it was Sung-hyo. The two exchanged a round of sharp words, but Sung-hyo eventually softened and told her he still had something left unsaid from their last conversation. Sukryu, having a pretty good idea of what he wanted to say, cut him off and explained that her mind was too much of a mess lately to start anything new. Sung-hyo, sensitive as ever, figured it had something to do with her ex, but all he could do was wait for the day when Sukryu was ready to listen. The next day, Sung-hyo's ex-girlfriend asked her to come see her latest artwork, clearly hoping Sung-hyo would admire and praise it. But Sung-hyo noticed the piece had been tossed aside like junk, and the ex's casual words actually gave her an unexpected insight. As long as you put your heart into something, no one can know if the result will be perfect until it's finished. Sung-hyo and his ex went out for dinner, but by coincidence, they ran into Sukryu having what looked like a final meal with her ex-boyfriend. Sitting at separate tables, neither Sung-hyo nor Sukryu could properly enjoy their food. Seeing how much Sung-hyo cared about Sukryu, his ex-girlfriend teased him, pretending Sung-hyo was her own ambiguous, almost boyfriend. Hearing this, Sukryu was so flustered she nearly choked. Sung-hyo followed her out when she went to the restroom. Luckily, Sung-hyo's ex showed up at the right moment by asking a straightforward question, and Sukryu admitted openly that her ex wasn't her boyfriend anymore. In the elevator on the way back, the ex sighed, joking that this was the first time he'd been tangled up in a love square. Not long after, Sukryu was rushed to the hospital for severe stomach pain. Only then did Sung-hyo learn the truth. 3 years ago, Sukryu had undergone major surgery, removing most of her stomach due to stomach cancer. Sung-hyo finally found the courage to face his feelings head-on and confessed his 10-year-long secret that he had loved Suk-ryu all along. But Suk-ryu, caught off guard and flustered, accidentally burned her hand in the moment. Sung-hyo immediately rushed to run her hand under cold water. When he suggested taking her to the hospital, Suk-ryu, panicked, quickly refused. That scene, carefully left unresolved, became a quiet hint from the director for what was to come. He gave her space and time to figure out her heart. After Sung-hyo left, Suk-ryu stood there washing her face over and over with cold water, trying to calm herself down. Because, truthfully, even as a child, Suk-ryu had liked Sung-hyo too. Even now, that same feeling was still there. He regretted confessing so hastily and started worrying about how to face her the next day. Suk-ryu was the same. The next day when they met, the first thing out of their mouths was, "Did you sleep well last night?" But both were clearly lying, pretending they had no memory of the conversation or feelings from the night before. Meanwhile, after failing to win Suk-ryu back, her ex-boyfriend shifted tactics and started playing hardball. He first convinced Suk-ryu's mother, who had always wanted her to return to the US. At the same time, her mom accidentally discovered that Suk-ryu had been secretly studying culinary arts. The idea that her daughter would give up such a bright future just to pursue her small dream of opening a snack shop wasn't something her parents could accept. Her mom strongly objected, and even her dad was deeply disappointed. Suk-ryu, who had been bottling up her frustrations, couldn't hold it in anymore and finally broke down. Ever since childhood, her younger brother had a heart condition, a small hole in his heart, which made their mother spoil him endlessly. Even though his condition later healed on its own, the favoritism never changed. Suk-ryu stormed out of the house. Sung-hyo chased after her and led her to a quiet path lined with blooming hydrangeas. The peaceful scenery finally helped Suk-ryu calm down. Sung-hyo even offered to let her practice cooking in the kitchen at his company whenever she wanted. But before long, her ex-boyfriend showed up at Sung-hyo's company, pestering them. He claimed he was helping his parents build a new house as they were preparing to return home, and tried to borrow a construction order through Sung-hyo. Sung-hyo, still holding a grudge and clearly distrustful, didn't want to help him. And so, the three of them, Suk-ryu, Sung-hyo, and the ex, settled into this weird rhythm. At one point, Sung-hyo bought a snack, the leopard-patterned mochi Suk-ryu had been craving, but before she could eat it, the ex-boyfriend objected, warning her that junk food was bad for her health. When Suk-ryu finally finished cooking, but before they could even take a bite, she suddenly broke out in cold sweat and crouched down, clearly in pain. Both of them rushed to help her, but Suk-ryu instinctively pushed Sung-hyo's hand away, and that one small gesture left him deeply unsettled. He didn't understand that Suk-ryu didn't want him to accompany her to the hospital, because if he did, he would inevitably discover the truth, that 3 years ago she had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Meanwhile, the story took another twist. The ex-boyfriend, once scolded and labeled a grade-A scumbag, was actually not the villain everyone thought. In fact, the real misunderstanding had been on Suk-ryu's side. Back then, she had seen him helping another girl with her contact lenses and assumed he was cheating, when it had all been innocent. At the time, their love had been sweet, and the ex-boyfriend had even proposed to her. But who would have thought? The very next day after accepting the proposal, Suk-ryu was told by the doctor that she had stomach cancer. Following the doctor's advice, she underwent surgery to remove 2/3 of her stomach. During that tough time, it was her ex-boyfriend who stayed by her side, never once leaving. That's why, the night she felt that stabbing stomach pain, she instinctively pushed Sung-hyo's hand away. She didn't want him to take her to the hospital, afraid he'd discover the truth. But when she woke up, it turned out that Sung-hyo had still brought her to the hospital, only he wasn't working that day. When she rushed out of the ward, she found her ex-boyfriend waiting for her right outside. Not long after, Sung-hyo, who had been anxiously searching for her, also showed up. In the end, the two of them sent Suk-ryu home together. After sending her home, Sung-hyo lay awake all night, tossing and turning with frustration. He couldn't figure out what had really happened between Suk-ryu and her ex. What was the story behind it all? The next day, Suk-ryu had another argument with her mother, this time over her dream of studying culinary arts. Afterward, Sung Hyo, who'd been waiting outside, pulled her away for breakfast, hoping to cheer her up. He chose congee, knowing it would be gentle on her stomach. Later, back at the company, Sung Hyo noticed the flowers Sukryu had sent him had wilted. Sukryu was meeting with her ex. Her ex even returned the engagement ring Sukryu had left behind all those years ago. That night, Sukryu told Sung Hyo about her ex's attempt to rekindle their relationship. Sung Hyo, frustrated and upset, asked, "Then what am I to you?" Meanwhile, Sukryu's mother, noticing Sung Hyo seemed distracted and troubled, invited him over for dinner. When Sukryu came home and saw him there, both of them felt a little awkward. Spotting a bottle of milk on the table, Sukryu was reminded of their expiration date promise. On the other side, Sukryu herself was torn. Caught between her ex, who had stayed by her side through thick and thin, and Sung Hyo, the straightforward man who had silently loved her all this time, she didn't know what to choose. It seemed unfair to her ex to rely on something as trivial as who came first to make such a big decision. The real reason she had left her ex back then wasn't their argument, but because the doctors had told her there was a high chance of recurrence. Sung Hyo, after being rejected, was left in such a daze that he almost fainted at work. Lying in bed, old memories flooded back. Memories of being left home alone by his mom, who had gone on a business trip, and crying in fear until it was Sukryu who came to comfort him. When he woke from his daze, it was Sukryu sitting at his bedside once again. Late at night, Sung Hyo woke to find that Sukryu had fallen asleep beside his bed, her head resting on the edge. When she woke up, she casually told him that it had been the company rep who called her, scolding her for not telling anyone he wasn't feeling well. Sung Hyo forced a smile and replied, "I won't trouble you anymore." But after she left, Sung Hyo noticed Sukryu had forgotten her bag on the floor. When he picked it up, the medical report inside caught his eye. That was when he finally realized her health wasn't just a passing issue. In fact, Sukryu's mother had already spotted her medicine while tidying up her room, but she couldn't read the English labels and hadn't pieced it together. Later, Sung Hyo's mother learned about Sukryu's illness and dragged him to visit her. When they opened the door, they heard Sukryu arguing with her parents. Sukryu's mother, heartbroken and furious, scolded her for keeping such a huge thing a secret. Her father, upon learning the truth, was in disbelief, unable to process the news. But the medicine in her room and the scar on her stomach left no room for doubt. When her parents thought about the past 3 years, about how much she had endured alone, their hearts filled with both guilt and anger. They instinctively blamed the ex-boyfriend, thinking he was the one who'd abandoned her. But Sukryu finally told them, for the past 3 years, it was her ex who had been quietly taking care of her. Sukryu explained that the reason she broke off the engagement back then was because she didn't want her ex to suffer with her. Even though she tried her best to reassure her parents that she was doing fine now, her mother couldn't help but complain. Her father, though calmer, asked again to confirm. "Are you really cured?" But Sukryu didn't have the courage to tell them the truth, that there was still a chance of recurrence, and right now, the results were still uncertain. Meanwhile, Sung Hyo was drowning in his own wave of guilt and heartache. It was his mother who reminded him that 3 years ago he had gone to the US, and that was when he had seen Sukryu and her ex together, looking sweet and close. That moment had hit him like a brick wall. After returning home, he had deliberately ignored all of her messages. At the same time, Nayeon overheard his own mother chatting with Sung Hyo's mother and only then found out the truth. His best friend Sukryu had been hiding her illness from everyone all along. It all finally made sense. From a distance, her ex-boyfriend stood quietly on a street corner, watching the happy scene unfold in front of him. That night, Sung Hyo's mom had wanted to share the good news with her husband, but before she could, Sung Hyo's dad suddenly brought up the idea of divorce. Meanwhile, Sukryu's ex called her too. He admitted that maybe all these years he had loved her the wrong way. Now, seeing someone better suited to stand by her side, he realized that maybe Sukryu was always meant to stay in her homeland. The two of them, once deeply in love, were both quietly heartbroken, but deep down, they understood that this might be the ending fate had written for them all along. Life gradually returned to normal. Then, suddenly, Sukryu's phone buzzed with a message. Without saying a word, Sung Hyo pulled her along and rushed to the airport. It turned out her ex was flying to the US, and their mutual acquaintance had told Sung-hyo, hoping Suk-ryu would come for a final goodbye. As the two former lovers shook hands at the departure gate, it marked the end of their story, a silent farewell to the past. So guys, with this,